Welcome to the Feisty Women's Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Gross, Ironman champion, PhD in women's history, and founder and CEO of Feisty Media. I started this show because I wanted to cut through the BS of diet culture and fitness culture and actually learn from high-achieving women at the top of their game who have figured out how to feel and perform their best at every stage of life. So I chat with experts, elite athletes, and leaders who have learned to succeed despite the massive gender data gap in exercise and medical science and product development. Every episode is filled with information, advice, and anecdotes that will help you fulfill your potential as an athlete, mom, leader, or business owner. And listen up. If you don't subscribe to our Women's Performance newsletter, you are definitely missing out. It's totally free. So head over to womensperformance.com and subscribe now. That's womensperformance.com. This podcast is a production of Feisty Media. Hello, Feisty listeners. I'm so glad you are here. One note before we get started, there seems to be like a happy hour or something happening right outside my office. So I do not have complete soundproofing in here just yet. So I apologize if there is some distracting background chatting and clinking of glasses. But I hope you can persevere for the sake of the cause here. So we also wanted to tell you that we've had some busy times these last few weeks of Feisty, so busy that producer Carrie and I decided to take a breath and play a rebroadcast on this podcast channel. So I hope you all had a chance to listen to the amazing Christine Yu last week, author of Up to Speed. In particular, if you missed that episode the first time around, because she was full of wisdom and insight based on her research. And for those who are in the first cohort of our new online course, Strong, I sincerely hope you are all learning a few things and feeling increasingly comfortable lifting heavy shit and understanding why women need to lift heavy shit and all of the things that are around that to support it, like nutrition and all the other things that you're learning in the course. So I genuinely hope that you are enjoying it, and it's certainly been incredible watching all of your comments come in as you go through the course together. So thank you for being there and for supporting each other. It's fantastic. Also this week in Feisty Land, we launched our campaign as we build into the VinFast Ironman World Championship in Kona, Hawaii. And this year, I'm a triathlete myself, so Kona, I raced in Kona at the Ironman World Championship 6 times. So it's definitely, doing this coverage is near and dear to my heart. The Men's World Championship this year was in Nice, France, and it is done as of last weekend. And the women will have the entire stage to themselves in Kona this year. So that's pretty exciting. So if you'd like to support the campaign to get maximum media coverage and viewership of the Women's World Championship, head on over to watchthewomenofkona.com. We will throw that link also into the show notes, watchthewomenofkona.com, and you can find everything you need to know over there. So, on to today's show. As we know, a lot of female athletes suffer from low energy availability and REDS, or RED-S, which stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. And just to underline how prevalent this problem is, one study showed that 41 to 47% of female athletes have problematic low energy availability. That means almost half of us are not performing at our best because we aren't eating enough. And while eating disorders and disordered eating play into this equation, it's also just hard to eat enough sometimes. I know I suffer from loss of appetite at certain times of day or month, and it's just hard to get the calories in. So I brought in a couple experts from Project RED-S. Project RED-S is the digital clubhouse for RED-S awareness, prevention, and support. It's a place where people of all ages, genders, abilities, and activities can come together to learn how to prevent or overcome relative energy deficiency in sport. It's a place to pursue peak performance in a healthy body and mind, where instead of winning at all costs, it's about winning without compromise. I really loved that excerpt from their website, which we will throw that obviously into the show notes as well. So today I have two guests that I'm talking to. One is the founder of Project Red S. She's called Pippa Woolven Peters, and she was an English middle schools and British universities champion and a former GB athlete, and is now a positive psychology coach and an athlete mentor. Over a decade of competing in international athletics while studying in the UK and the US, Pippa experienced her fair share of highs and lows, including Red S. Several years after overcoming the condition herself, Pippa established Project Red S with the aim of providing the resources she needed when her struggle began. My other guest is Holly Brooks, also from Project Red S. She's a two-time cross-country skiing Olympian, a former professional athlete, and now an advocate and counselor for athletes. Holly is intimately aware of the sacrifice, dedication, and perseverance that athletes leverage to reach their potential in sport. Her own experience with Red S led her down a long and painful road of infertility to start her family, and today she helps others avoid similar pitfalls in her role as a licensed professional counselor in Alaska. I honestly, I love talking to people who use their experience to help others avoid the ways that they've felt that they were taken off track in their lives. So for that reason alone, I love this interview. But there's so much to learn from this episode for every athlete. So I hope you enjoy. Pippa and Holly, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you both. You're kind of all, we're kind of all over the world, basically. Pippa, where are you?
I am in Beaconsfield, just outside of London in England.
Right, and Holly, you're in Alaska, am I right?
Yeah, I'm in Anchorage, Alaska. So
okay, I'm already off track of the questions I was going to ask, but how did you two find each other?
Holly, I think this is one for you.
Okay, it's kind of a long story, but I will try to do the short version. I have in the past gone on a speaking tour to high school runners just about eating disorders, REDS, and previously the female athlete triad in my hometown, just wanting to raise awareness. And I had recently done the latest version of that speaking tour, and a previous sponsor of mine, I was a competitive cross-country skier, sent me an email and said, "Hey, Holly, we need to do something about the female athlete triad." And I wrote back and I was like, "Hey, it's actually called REDS." And I had just had a nice write-up in the newspaper about it. So I sent him the article about it, and he had already bought all the domains, femaleathletetriad.com and all these things.
And he was like 6 steps ahead, but 12 steps behind.
Literally, yes. His enthusiasm is palpable. Mm-hmm. And I, in this process of sending him some information to try to educate him, I stumbled across Pippa's old website called Athletes in Balance. I found it in a Runner's World article and sent it to him. And next thing I knew, he had reached out to Pippa on LinkedIn and offered her funding to quit her job and start Project Red S full time. Wow. And so it is a really random story. I love it. And so I'm in Alaska, Pippa's in the UK, and we've been working together for a while now. And we met for the first time in person just a couple of weeks ago in Boston at the Female Athlete Conference. So we had never met. And that is essentially how Project Red S, but Project Reds started.
Wow, what a crazy story. Okay, Pippa, it's like a dream to have someone reach out to you and say,
I'm going to fund your passion. Like that's wild. On your website, it says the world's fastest growing club for sustainable performance. So tell us a little bit about what Project Reds is. Yeah, I mean, it still feels like a bit of a dream. I was an athlete before, and I was working full time in a job that was absolutely nothing to do with sport or Red S. And so it was a very surreal experience to have somebody, offer their support and back me to bring awareness to this condition on like a mass scale. And in a nutshell, I was simply just mentoring other athletes, a bit like Holly. I was going into schools and colleges and clubs and delivering talks just to raise awareness, having experienced the condition myself. And I still had a bit of an athlete's voice. I was competing for England and I was just trying to do my bit for the cause. And it was through Holly that we met this awesome guy who was offering us this donation, and we decided to come together and try to create a resource that kind of provided everything an athlete would need that was suffering from this condition. And from there, it expanded into prevention and providing something for supporters too. So not just the athlete, but also their coach or parent or partner who might be trying to support them with this too.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. And you're both elite athletes, right? So I do want to take a minute before we start, because we're going to talk about Red S and LEA and some of the challenges, but like, could you take a moment to tell us like about your sports careers and some of your accolades? Holly, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, well, I was and still am a cross-country skier. And I always talk about my career in that it was a little bit of a surprise seeing that I grew up in Seattle, Washington. It doesn't snow in Seattle, but I grew up skiing with my family. My dad was my coach. My siblings were my teammates, the way I describe it. And I was pretty middle of the road. But what was really great is that I fostered this great like intrinsic love for the sport. So I skied in college. I never made it to NCAAs, which is, maybe fairly basic, if you're going to be on the elite track. I graduated from my undergraduate experience at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, and promptly moved to Alaska, where I found lots of skiers. And so I actually started working as a ski coach at a high school. I had 100 kids, everything from exchange students who had never seen snow before to the junior national champion. And it was a dream come true for someone who grew up in Seattle in the middle of the grunge era, who did this really the sport that felt very obscure. And so I then became a full-time coach for one of the prominent clubs in the country called APU Nordic Ski Center. And I started skiing a lot. So as a coach, my style was to do the intervals with my athletes. So I wasn't on the side of the trail. Mm-hmm. And then I had all these friends that skied. And so I ended up getting in really, really, really good shape and not knowing it. I went years without racing and then jumped in some races and did well, thought it was a fluke, jumped in other races, did well, thought it was a fluke. And then at some point, I couldn't ignore the fact that maybe I was faster than I thought. So it was hard, though, because in my mind, I really identified as this kind of mediocre, middle of the pack athlete.
Yeah.
So I had this really interesting career where I was a coach, and then I became an elite athlete. So I made my first Olympic team at the age of 27, and it was very convenient, I guess, in a way, because Olympic trials were here in my hometown. Mm-hmm. So I had all of the people that I coached out cheering for me. I had like literally the biggest cheer squad ever. It was incredible. So then I went on to race in the Vancouver Olympics in 2010, in Sochi in 2014, and then retired after that. So I was a coach and then an elite athlete. The whole thing was unexpected, and also just such a blessing, and a fun story.
That's a crazy story. How did in the first, when the athletes you were coaching first found out that like
that their coach is actually the one who made the team? Like, how did they respond? Like, were they supportive immediately, or was it like, wait a second, we're supposed to be the athletes?
Totally. It was, at first they were so excited. Like everyone was just kind of along for the ride with me. It was really, really exciting. And then reality hit that, hey, wait a minute. This means that we might be losing her as our coach. And so it was, yeah, they were definitely disappointed. But I know my first year of elite racing, I got invited to go on the World Cup, but I had already made the commitment to coach at Junior Olympics. Right. And I'm like someone of my word. And so I actually passed up, this opportunity to go race on the World Cup because I had already committed to, coaching essentially high school age athletes at their national championship. So
wow, I love that. Yeah, amazing. I think I like that story because, and I come from Ironman triathlon, right? And so there's a lot of that. So a lot of like late bloomers or people coming from other sports sort of later in their mid-20s into the sport. So, but other sports tracks don't necessarily have that. Like if you're not doing it as a teenager, there's no way you're going to an Olympic Games kind of thing.
Pretty much all my teammates were and had been in the development pipeline, since they were
right
14 or earlier. So it's not very common in my sport. So anyway.
Wow. Yeah. And Pippa, tell us about your story. You were an elite runner for GB. Am I right?
Yeah, I feel like my sport is pretty boring compared to both of yours. And I'm wondering if it's too late for me to take up either triathlon or
it's never too late.
I'm still in my 20s, so maybe this time. Not for long, but yes. So I came from a really sporty family. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, and all 3 of my older siblings had represented England or Great Britain in their respective sports. Which
wow,
yeah, I know.
Right, tell me the sports. That's amazing.
So, and actually, both of my parents as well. Just to add to that, but my dad, my brother, and my sister were field hockey players. My mum was a squash player, and my other sister is a professional event rider. So as in horses. And I guess I had a tough act to follow, but I never really felt any pressure in that sense, because when we were young, we all just did everything. We never really focused too much on one thing. And I played hockey for the south of England as well, and loved running, but never took it too seriously until I made the decision to go to university in England. And I was pretty average at first, actually. I never really won races. But eventually in my last year of school, I won the English school steeplechase, which was still a bit of an up and coming event back then. And I managed to get a scholarship at Birmingham University. And I was there for 2 years before deciding to make the jump over to America. And the allure of America had always sort of been there. I knew that was something I wanted to do one day. But when I was making the decision about where to go at the age of 18, I just didn't feel either psychologically or, I just didn't feel mature enough. And I certainly wasn't doing a high enough training volume. So I'm really glad that I went to Birmingham first and just sort of built up towards being able to handle a much higher level of competition in America. And so I went off to FSU after 2 years in Birmingham, and that was a dream come true. Every British athlete would dream about going over to America and, almost acting like a professional athlete. And I was there for 2 years, and I graduated with a different degree from Florida State, and then came back to the UK to finish my former degree in Birmingham. So yeah, and in that time, I went to the World Juniors. I ran at the Commonwealth Games, which is like a mini version of the Olympics. But I never made the Olympics, and that still, hangs over me slightly. But I think maybe when we talk about Reds, see why.
Yeah. Wow. Do you think, just back to this family thing, what do you think? Do you think it's in your genes, or do you think, would you put the fact that so many people in your family were elite athletes into is that genetics, or is that nurture, or how would you describe that?
I definitely think a bit of both. I'm not that interested in sport other than running and actually doing that myself. I'm not sort of prone to go and watch any other sports event or do things that I'm not actively participating in. So I don't know. I think it was a bit of both. And I think it was fun. So that made it really easy to do lots of things and to do them well, because we wanted to spend time outdoors doing sport. So yeah, there's maybe an element of genetic talent there, but certainly not 100%.
Right. So tell us then, since you kind of led into it there, Pippa, your story with Red S and LEA. I know a lot of athletes have struggled with that. So just tell us your sort of personal story.
So yeah, it wasn't really something that I'd ever imagined struggling with. I, came from this family who were always doing sport, and we just ate like horses, and it was kind of a survival of the fittest approach to meal times.
You didn't literally eat horses. You ate like horses.
We ate like horses. Okay. I don't think my sister would have approved if we had. But yeah, we kind of just, all muddled in, and it was like having 4 teenage boys for my mum, probably, because we would just fight over food and we'd always get our fill. And so when I went off to university in the UK, I was lucky enough to get a meal plan where you just turn up to the canteen and eat what's on offer, and that was abundant, and it was just carbs on carbs, and it was perfect for someone like me who was expending so much energy in training and studying and traveling around, and that was awesome. And then when I went over to America, it was just such a different story. I was all of a sudden sort of thrown into this really elite environment where nutrition was something that people talked about and focused on. We had this concept of clean eating that everybody on the team sort of bought into, and that was actively encouraged by our coach. And something that I'd never really heard of, but I was quite a all-in person. So once I came to understand this topic, I thought, well, yeah, I'm going to go for this. I've never tried to make refinements to my diet before, and maybe this is what it will take to get me to that next level. And so I did. And it was very subtle at first. I would just cut out the extra bag of chips or extra cookies after my meal, and, very slowly whittling my diet down to what you might think would be the diet of an elite athlete. And I was obviously doing a little bit more training. The intensity was a bit higher. And so all of these changes kind of brought about this perfect storm for low energy availability. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea, that I was falling down this slippery slope towards relative energy deficiency until I would just start getting ill and injured. And these things would take longer to shift than would be normal, and they would recur. And this wasn't something I was used to. I'd never really had an injury before this. And so it was difficult, because all of these things we come to expect from sport to some degree. You expect to feel tired and ill and injured. And when you're training in such an elite environment, that's kind of normalized. And it wasn't until I eventually returned home to the UK that I found a medical expert who could diagnose me with Red S or Reds. So yeah, it was, I never put any blame on the institution or my coach or any particular individual, but it was just this brilliant combination of factors that unfortunately led me into the downward spiral.
Yeah, that's such a relatable story, because I think that for a lot of elite athletes, but also for a lot of everyday athletes, like it's that focus on performance and just like self-improvement, and then all the messaging that we get about what our diet should look like, that actually can lead to the LEA and the Red S. Like, yes, you have eating disorders and disordered eating and those kinds, and it's like a scale, right? But that actually it's something that can happen in a way that's where we're just so focused on our performance. And it sounds like that's sort of what happened with you.
Yeah, I mean, it often starts with the absolute best intentions. We athletes just want to get the best out of ourselves, and members of the regular population who wouldn't necessarily define themselves as athletes might just want to make some healthy, quote unquote, changes. And it can very easily lead to this low energy availability, which, when it's not addressed, can become chronic and then lead to this whole host of health problems.
Right. And so do you feel that, do you feel like you had lost potential there because of the injuries and the illness that were kind of a knock-on effect from the Red S?
Yes, definitely. I think because it took me so long to reach even a diagnosis and then an understanding of the condition and how to overcome it, I did waste years and years. And even once I knew what the problem was, I didn't really have a support system around me to help make those changes. And by the time I knew what it was, I had become so used to acting in a certain way with my training and eating in a certain way. And then, these behaviors and preoccupations, as Holly will know, become very hard to rewire. So yes, I definitely didn't reach my potential. I mean, I'll never say never. I might one day return to high level sport, who knows? But yeah, it's a shame. And I see this happening to athletes across the globe at every level of sport.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I'm not a huge like regret person. But when I look at, and it sounds like you're not either, you're continuing to move forward and everything. But when I look back on my career, it's like, I don't even want to necessarily analyze it because I feel very confident that I was in and out of LEA for the entire 15 years of a pro triathlon career, right? And as long as I can now be doing something to help, like, and exactly like you are, right? Like help kids now or young women not have to do that. And so like I feel great about it.
Totally, exactly. And as much as it's a story I wish I didn't have to tell, at least perhaps it might help steer someone on the right track, or make them recognize these behaviors or symptoms in themselves. And that's helpful. I wish I'd had more athletes talking about this back when I was suffering from it.
Yeah. And Holly, you were able to go to a couple Olympic Games, which is amazing. But I understand you had trouble later getting pregnant. Is that right?
Yeah. And so I, at one point lost my, at first I lost my cycle due to the Mirena IUD, and then got that taken out. And then my period just never came back. And so when I was an athlete, it was just really convenient. And, I think a lot of athletes are just so focused and so on track. What can I do for my sport? And it was really convenient to not have a period. And so I really didn't care. In fact, I embraced it. And it wasn't until I retired that was kind of like, hey, this is maybe a problem, right? Like I want to start a family. And so luckily, my low energy availability, or my experience with reds wasn't as extreme, right, as Pippa's. And so I was lucky that I didn't have a huge host of symptoms. But when it came time to start a family, it was definitely an issue, right? And I went through a pretty long process with infertility, then multiple pregnancy loss, et cetera, et cetera. And so what was at one point really convenient for me as an athlete became really, really, really difficult quite quickly. And so, Pippa, we've talked about how there are so many components of REDS, and fertility and the ability to have children is one of the many implications. And luckily it worked out for me. I currently have 5-year-old twins. So it feels all good now. But when I think of other athletes in this situation, I really want them to have their options open, and to not limit their future just based on their like athletic desires and pursuits.
So if we're going to talk about how we're helping the next generation, like what should young athletes or any female athlete look out for as the symptoms of RED-S? Like what are the red flags?
I mean, as I alluded to, these things are very subtle, and they are things we come to expect from performing in sport. So illness, injury, fatigue. And I think it's just when these things become too frequent or take too long to shift, or they're paired with a bone stress injury, or a missing or abnormal menstrual cycle, or loss of morning erections for male athletes. And it's just noticing when things start to shift between being what might be expected of an athlete once a season, an injury or an illness or something, and actually becoming a bit too persistent or recurring. And there is a line there, and I think it's very hard for the athlete themselves to determine when that's crossed, but hopefully the support system around them will be gaining a knowledge and an understanding of these issues and can help them too.
I often just think about changes in behavior, and it's really difficult because we've talked about how there's this fine line between what makes you a dedicated athlete is also, and someone who is exhibiting perseverance and, the ability to be all in and dedicated in their sport is also one of the kind of risk factors, right? And that characteristic can easily go sideways and make someone really good at, engaging in disordered behaviors and, having disordered thoughts. And so it's really nuanced, but I often think about opportunity cost, and when athletes, for example, when they can't travel without their own food, right? Or they get so obsessed with clean eating, or and those behaviors, or when thoughts of food and body start to just rule their lives, right? And it's hard because our bodies are our tools, right, as athletes, but it's really hard to decipher when do you cross that line. And, I often talk about how one of my passions is sustainability in sport. And I often see people start to lose the joy in their sport, and it just becomes, more like a job. How can I get faster? How can I get better? And it becomes this obsessive runaway train. And I know maybe that's not a very specific answer, but, I see that kind of behavior change, or they really lose sight of their why and what got them into sport in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing, I often think about this, and I think a lot of this is the question I would ask. If 20-year-old Sarah was more informed about Reds and LEA than we were back then, I think, you see, like, if you look, for example, your sport, Pippa, steeplechase, or anything that happens on the track or in running, you can see very clearly that there's a body type that tends to be successful at that. Right. And so if you are, like, let's say you are someone who is trying to achieve that, like, and it's like you wearing it on the outside, you can't see the size of their lungs from watching someone on TV. Right. How do you talk to athletes about that, about balancing, like, that kind of the obvious need to be like, well, my body needs to fit into this category in order to be successful at this. How do you talk about that part of it? Like, and do you think that there's too narrow a range of bodies, or do we see different types of, because in some sports like gymnastics, sorry, now I'm just having a little rant, but like in gymnastics, we've seen an evolution of different types of bodies that have been successful as we've kind of come to realize that this is a problem. So like gymnastics, when I was a kid, it was like tiny little teenagers, right? And now you see these strong women out there, like a lot, it's more variety of body types. So how do we talk to young athletes about that particular piece, especially when they're seeing something that might not align with what we're telling them, which is like, you need to eat more, right?
Well, I guess there's two parts to that from my perspective. And the first is that I wish that the athletes who had the type of body that I was chasing were able to explain to me that if I just played the long game and carried on training hard, carried on feeling well and recovering, then I would have acquired that naturally over the course of a long and sustainable career. And then I also wish that there were more role models of people in different body types and shapes and sizes, showing that it was possible to be at the top of their game, whatever that looked like, in that body. And then I might not have felt such a pressure to look like somebody else. But it's very hard when you're a young, aspiring athlete and you're looking up to these people who look so different to how you might look. And trying to imagine that one day you'll get there naturally, it's very difficult, especially when social media and general media perpetuate this idea that you have to make changes to your diet and drastically increase your training in order to do so.
Yeah, great answer. Holly, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, so one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is, Pippa referred to if someone would have just told me that I would acquire that body in the long game. I think that's absolutely right. But the problem is that especially young athletes, in the middle of puberty, they don't have that foresight. And something that I've been thinking about a lot is in the US, we now have something called the NIL, name, image, and likeness, right? And all of a sudden, athletes own their name, image, and likeness. And NCAA sport is no longer amateur, right? Those athletes can make money. In a lot of ways, I think that's a good thing in some ways, right? Like, I don't think that just the institutions and the coaches should be making money off the backs of the athletes. But what I have noticed and what I think we don't fully understand yet is the impact that that's having on athlete mental health and the pressure to acquire that body
Oh,
now.
interesting. Yeah. So more like a body image kind of public, like, yeah. Yeah. That's so
Yeah,
interesting.
because all of a sudden, high school athletes are being recruited to NCAA institutions, and there is a lot of money on the line, right? And now they own their name, image, and likeness. And so now, they have we have collegiate athletes, and I think there's a gymnast from LSU who is making the most money and has the biggest social media following. And in essence, they are being recruited for their bodies, right? This like really perpetuates the sexualization of sport and of athletes. And so it's really hard to focus on the long game when there is so much emphasis on the short game, right? And what can you do for me this weekend? What can you do for me this season? Right. And now people are being recruited for their talent, yes, but they're also being recruited for diet culture reasons and and their bodies and their aesthetic. And as a therapist, I'm a little terrified, of this. And I am really curious to see how this is going to trickle down, because we know that there are lots of dangers associated with early sports specialization. And so if there is more money on the line earlier, it's really pressuring athletes and families to, do everything they can earlier, often at the same time that athletes and female-bodied athletes are supposed to be going through puberty, right? And there are, there can be some awkward moments, right? We know that for the long game, puberty is performance enhancing, right? But things and pressures like the NIL aren't, they don't give us enough time,
right,
to go through that process.
Yeah.
And so I am very concerned about this and the implication that it's going to have on fueling. I think it's going to have a big impact on the athlete population.
Right. And how do that could even apply to, that's a really great example about NIL and NCAA athletes and high school athletes being recruited. But also I'm thinking of the everyday athlete who might just have a goal that's a short-term goal. That's sort of like, okay, I qualified as an amateur to the world championships in my sport or something like that. And I've got 4 months. Right. And I feel like if I was in a smaller body, I would do better. So what do we tell those people?
It's a good question. I guess we tell them that maybe making shortcuts now will get them to where they want to go in the short term, but unless they're able to then recharge their batteries and rest properly and fuel properly, then it won't be sustainable in the long term. And I think people just need to know the potential costs of whatever changes they're going to make before they make them, so that they can make that decision informed and educated.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do anything if you're not healthy, right? Sorry, Holly, go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to say the problem is that people, we live in this society that is all about immediate gratification.
Mm-hmm.
And someone can preach about the long-term effects or the long game all day long, but I work with lots of teenagers, and if it's not affecting them now, often they don't care. Right. And so we need to be talking about the long-term effects, but we also need to be talking about the short-term effects. Right. But the problem is, and we all know this, if, especially in endurance sports where there is a strength to weight ratio, if you lose weight, you might temporarily see an increase in performance, right? But it's very, very temporary. And so I think that's the challenge that we're facing here. How do we highlight these long-term effects, right? When people don't have fully developed brains, I mean, really,
Totally. Mm-hmm.
really. But I always tell people, hey, it's, my therapy clients, I'm like, hey, it's not about my goals, right? I'm here to help you with your goals. But if I had a goal for you, my goal for you is to be able to be active for life. And I don't want you to be a 21-year-old walking around with the bones of an 80-year-old. I want you to be able to do this for the rest of your life and to be active. And I know that that's hard to see right now, and that's hard to prioritize right now. But I'm telling you, this is really, really important.
Yeah. And even, in my sport, I've seen quite a few athletes go through that little immediate, like you're talking about, that a little immediate performance boost where they get a little bit leaner and they have maybe one race or two races, but then but then everything goes south, and it goes south fast and hard, and like recovering and coming out of that can take months or years. Right. So I think that even people without a fully developed brain, as you say, can understand that, like, it's, yes, you get a performance boost, but it's very, very sometimes, but it's very short term.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the challenges of that potential performance boost is that then the athlete might associate whatever they were doing with their diet and their training to that performance achievement, and then continue to think that that's the only way they'll ever perform that well, and not make the changes required post whatever performance they might have done well in to make it sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. A few weeks back, I talked to a couple of our Canadian lightweight rowers. And there was layers and layers to that interview, but one of the things we talked about was making weight, because they have to be a certain combined weight in the boat. Right. And what struck me walking away was like how much support they had in order to be able to go through a cycle every year where they were like a little heavier in the winter or the off season. And then they would, they had like dietitians and mental health coaches and their coach, and they had like people to support them at every single step so they could continue to be healthy during that phase where they had to be a little bit lighter to make weight for the boat. And then go back into this phase where they were, sometimes like several kilos heavier during the off season, and getting used to that process. And I'm like, wow, if that's what it takes for elite rowers, just to be a few kilos one way or another, all of this support for Olympians, right? I'm like, the rest of us don't have that support system, right? Like, it's actually a dangerous game then to be like undercutting your food, right? And trying to stay healthy. So it just kind of struck me like in that way that, wow, most of us don't have that opportunity to do that. So why not just stay healthy all the time?
That is such a good example, though, of how it can be done with the right support system in place, and how many of us try to do it alone and actually don't have that support system, and it really backfires. But sometimes it does take trial and error. It takes personal experience to recognize that. And our challenge, as people who run Project Reds, is to try to educate them of it before they have to go backwards, which is tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to ask you, this is a question that I've asked before on the podcast, because one of our feisty interns who's a young athlete asked this question of me. And I was like, good question. That, she's kind of, as a 20-year-old, got the message that we need to eat more. Like, she's like, I know we need to eat more, got all that, whatever. And then she's like, but what do I do? What do I actually eat? Or how do I know? Like, and we have a course called Fueled that's designed for like all active women around, and where one of the modules introduces this idea of intuitive eating, right? And I think so many people have shut down their ability to connect with their own hunger, for example, because we've been told so many other things that we've got used to ignoring that. So how do we help? Sorry, this is like a massive question, but how do we help people understand or empower people to know how much they need to be eating and what they need to do to recover from their activities and be healthy?
That's a really good question.
So who wants to take that one? I'll leave it up to you two.
I mean, I'll take a stab at it. I think that there's a lot of confusion out there, right? And we know how much money, the billions of dollars that are behind diet culture. Everyone's trying to sell you something, whether it's a food or an after exercise, supplement, and it can be very confusing. And I work with the athletes that I work with in a pretty simplistic way. And I say, hey, look, it actually doesn't have to be that confusing. Let's just make it really simple. And I actually have paper plates in my office, and I've been doing this lately, where I help athletes with kind of basic meal planning. And I'm like, hey, let's go through the 3 meals, and let's talk about our macronutrients, and let's write down examples of all of those macronutrients, right? And by the way, here's what like a hunger fullness scale looks like. And I love what you said about intuitive eating. And I often talk to my athletes about this cross section of intuitive eating and prescriptive eating, right? And I want them to learn to be in tune with their body. So we do lots of body scans. We talk about what are the cues for hunger and fullness, right? And, as athletes, it's not just about overriding those cues, right? As endurance athletes, we override the pain to be good at our sport. So I talk a lot about the difference between, hey, override the pain in your sport. And at the same time, you need to really not override those feelings in your body. But at the same time, I think it's this mixture of intuitive eating and be in tune with yourself, but we also have to engage in prescriptive eating. You might not be hungry, but if you have a 3-hour, workout, you need to fuel for that 3-hour workout, right? And I do a lot of talking about fueling before, fueling after. Let's just focus on, for the most part, carbs before, carbs and protein after. Let's mix a little fat in that. And, I've been having a lot of fun with the paper plates in my office. And, when people, they get online and they try to learn how to fuel themselves, there's a lot of confusion just because there are so many different ideas. And so part of me is like, hey, maybe it doesn't have to be that complicated, right? Let's take it back to the basics. And, generally, if you're training more, you need to eat more. And that can be confusing because if you're training hard and you're really fatigued, that can suppress, some of your appetite. So we need to know that. So I don't know if that helps. I'm sure you have something to add, Pippa.
Well, I'm not sure mine is all that helpful because it centers around experience and figuring out what works for you. And honestly think one of the biggest and best takeaways I took from the Female Athlete Conference in Boston was that there's a reason why the people winning medals at the Olympics are, in their late or mid 20s and not their teens, because they have honed this career's worth of experience and they understand what works for them and how to periodize training and nutrition to really maximize their potential in sport. And it's the same when you think about what works for you on a day-to-day basis. It takes trial and error and learning. Actually, on this bike ride, I need to eat before I'm hungry because I know what will happen if I don't. And it takes experience and time. But I think we rely too much on plans and prescriptive things and social media to tell us what to do. And actually, it's all within us if we just listen to our bodies.
Right. I'm hearing intuitive eating, intuitive eating vibes again on that one. It's interesting because this is a question we get a lot in the course, because when we introduce intuitive eating, of course, immediately people are like, oh, well, but how do I do that? Sometimes some people are like, I don't even have hunger cues anymore. I don't know what to do. And I've kind of found over time that sometimes when I do prescriptive, what you called prescriptive eating there, Holly, like knowing I need a certain amount of carbs and protein, say after my workout, that becomes intuitive, because like later in the day, if I have my recovery shake with me at the gym and I take it in the window that I'm supposed to take it, then I will notice that later in the day, I'll be less fatigued. Right. So like my brain has started to make those connections, and it almost then becomes intuitive. Like I don't want to miss that fueling window because I know I'm going to feel like I want to have a nap at 3 p.m. If I do. So it's like there's this very interesting like interplay between those two things that like actually you can, once you start to connect the dots on them, I think it can start, more and more things can become intuitive. And I also think that eventually everyone must get hungry. Right.
Totally. But, I think that losing those hunger cues and even just being in tune with your body is one of the main symptoms of, eating disorders or disordered eating. And so that's why, whenever you're treating someone, right, for an eating disorder or disordered eating, the first step is refueling them. Food is the medicine, right? And so people aren't going to have those hunger cues or those fullness cues if they aren't fueling themselves properly. Their body doesn't trust them, right? Their body, starts shutting down. It goes into this like scarcity response, right? And so, you need to be fueling, in a consistent, reliable way in order to even get to the start line of learning how to check into and with your body.
For decades, running shoes have been researched, tested, and designed for men. Brands have relied on the shrink it and pink it approach to sell male shoes to female customers. That's why we are so excited to be working with Hedas. Hedas designs athletic footwear for women that elevates performance, safety, and style. Hedas unlocks the science behind women's biomechanics through dedicated research, creates better shoes for women that support their longevity and performance, and establishes new design standards to promote transparency in a male-biased industry. Hedas have a lower ankle collar to reduce rubbing, a breathable mesh toe box to allow for ventilation and to allow for female toe shape, a special kind of plate in the midsole to keep tired legs going, a narrow heel cup to reduce heel slippage and take the pressure off our Achilles, and a rounded instep to create a snug fit. Hedas has 3 shoe models designed for different sessions: the Alma Cruise for long runs, the Alma Tempo for training days, and the Alma Speed for pushing the pace. I've personally been running in the Alma Cruise and I love them. It's the shoe I always wanted and never knew I needed. The fit is perfect in every way. You can get your own pair of Hedas at hedas.com and use the code Feisty20 for 20% off. That's Feisty20 at hedas.com, and it will all be in the show notes. As we head into summer, rest and recovery are critical for improving sports performance, reducing stress, and living a long and healthy life. We should all invest in better sleep. So, think about the thing you lay your head on for 8 hours a night. If it's not exactly right for you, it can lead to needless tossing and turning, or worse, have you waking up with an unrelenting kink in your neck.
My new Lagoon pillow has helped me improve my sleep immensely by pairing me with the performance pillow that has everything I need. So I personally was matched with the Otter pillow. Shout out to Team Otter, which I love because it has a gentle cooling effect. And I was able to choose how much stuffing I wanted in it, which is super important to me because I'm doing a decent amount of CrossFit these days and my shoulders are kind of creaky. So having a pillow that is stuffed just to the right height keeps my neck and head in exactly the right position and comfortable for the entire night. And as of fall 2023, Lagoon launched their 100% mulberry silk pillowcases. It's cool to the touch, buttery soft, and great for your skin and hair. You've got to go check out this pillowcase if you want to feel great and look great every morning. Waking up for morning workouts has never felt better. I'm refreshed and pain-free thanks to my Lagoon pillow. To check it out for yourself, go to lagoonsleep.com/performance and take the 2-minute sleep quiz to find your perfect pillow match. And then use the code PERFORMANCE for 15% off your first purchase. That's code PERFORMANCE at lagoonsleep.com/performance, whole 15% off, and the link is in the show notes. You can just click through there.
Endurance sports should be accessible to everyone, right? That's why we are so excited to be partnering with Motive. Motive is one of the fastest growing training apps in the world today, with thousands of amateur athletes signing up every month and a nearly perfect 4.9 star rating in the App Store. You are not a template, and your training plan should not be either. Prepare for running races, triathlons, cycling events, duathlons, or swim runs, however your season schedule shapes up, and get training written by some of the best coaches in the world in each discipline who know what it takes to help amateur athletes reach their goal on race day. The app takes the training written by those experts and then creates the most optimal training plan for your schedule, abilities, and goals. Plus, the training is fully customized to your race schedule, how much you can train each week, your current abilities, and the goals you want to achieve in your race. You can use the app for free as long as you want, or get all the upgraded features from the app for just $19.99 a month. But as a Feisty listener, you can sign up at mymotive.com and use the code Feisty for 2 months of full premium access. That's right, you get 2 months of premium for free. So you quite literally have nothing to lose. So head over to mymotive.com, mymotiv.com, and use the code Feisty, Feisty. And on a personal note, I know the founder of Motive, and he is driven to make triathlon and all endurance sports more accessible for the athletes who care about their performance but who aren't quite ready for a full-time personal coach. If that sounds like you, definitely try the app for 2 months for free. You literally have nothing to lose.
So, I feel like I don't know, this is completely unsubstantiated, but we've gone through a couple decades of women being told that like 1,200, 1,400, 1,600 calories is enough food in a day. Right. And if you're in any way active, I mean, even sometimes if you're not, that's absolutely not enough. So we're kind of like unwinding all of that. Do you think that, if we look at the average active sort of population, do you think that a lot of people are struggling with LEA and Red S and don't know it?
Massively. I think we underestimate how many people are on that scale. And, yes, a lot of people might not have a clinical eating disorder, or maybe not even disordered eating, but a heck of a lot of people are potentially unintentionally under eating for their sport and for their activity level. Because I do think that we as active women need far more than we all realize, because of the reasons you've just explained, because of the culture we're working so hard to reverse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I see it in my clientele all the time. I mean, I generally do work with athletes and the athletic population, but there is always, I mean, I guess I won't speak in absolutes, but there's usually some kind of component of preoccupation with what am I putting in my body? There are pressures to look a certain way. And, I think that there is this myth that the only people that struggle with food and, body image issues are skinny, white runners. And I think we're learning more about atypical anorexia, and we're learning more just about the prevalence of these issues, and the fact that binge eating is more common than anorexia and bulimia combined, right? And so this
Whoa,
just
I didn't
really,
know that.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And so this really just all leads to the fact that this is a very prevalent issue across the whole population. And yes, it is more prevalent in athletes, but diet culture is everywhere, and the messages to look a certain way and be uh, be a certain way are everywhere.
Hmm. Yeah, so you two are doing a great job with Project Red S and getting information out to people. If folks are listening and they need some support or information, what kinds of where should they go? Pippa, where should they
Well,
go?
hopefully, if they're not already on your website or podcast, then our website provides a lot of information about what this condition actually is, how to support yourself in either preventing it or overcoming it, and also how to support someone that you care about. Because I think that's equally important, that we're all banding together to try to either prevent the issue occurring in the first place or do something about it. So it's red-s.com. And we have Instagram account at Project Red S. And if you just type that in, you'll find it. And yeah, we do link out to lots of different sources that we find helpful and credible. So we'll be linking to yours too. So cool.
Fantastic. Yeah, you have an amazing team.
I just wanted to add that, REDS and LEA is something that, obviously this group thinks a lot about, but sometimes it feels like it can be a little bit of an echo chamber, right? We all know about this, but there is still a huge part of the population that doesn't understand it, including medical providers. And
Right.
so I
Great
just
point.
wanted to draw attention to actually a letter that Pippa drafted, where if an athlete or someone in the exercising population is concerned that they may be experiencing REDS, Pippa drafted this letter that they can actually take to their GP, their general practitioner, that explains the condition, that explains some of the symptoms, explains some of the diagnostic tools, right? That a practitioner can go through with their patient or client, and that's a really useful tool, because we all know about this, but there is still a huge group of athletic trainers, physical therapists, doctors, specialists who really aren't aware. And that's part of the issue here. The athlete or the person might need to advocate for themselves in this situation. So our website is really meant to be kind of this all-inclusive resource where you can learn about it. The voice is very much athlete to athlete. At the Female Athlete Conference, there was a lot of talk about how do we translate the research and the science to the general population. And that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to be that vehicle where we're writing in an understandable tone. We are, again, that athlete to athlete voice. We're trying to translate the research and to make it approachable and applicable to the greater population.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I had an experience with my healthcare provider, a postpartum experience as an athlete, right? Where it's like kind of like that same thing. I wanted her to be educated in what I needed as an athlete specifically. After, I think we all feel that kind of disconnect where even with the most well-meaning physicians, they obviously cannot memorize everything that's needed for every single part of the population all the time. So resources like that are really important. How do we support you? Are you a nonprofit?
We're not a nonprofit yet. We do plan on becoming one. It's kind of tricky working internationally and understanding, getting your head around how to set that up in the most effective way. But yeah, we do rely on generous donors and anybody who's willing to contribute to the cause, which is amazing. And people are very supportive of it. So yeah, every little helps.
Amazing.
We're not selling anything. I think sometimes people think that if you're not a nonprofit, that you're out to make a lot of money or something like that. And really, so far at the beginning, it's at least streamlined our process and let us focus on, our mission and our job without cumbersome paperwork and, a board. And eventually maybe we might get there. It might be limiting us in some way, but right now we're really focused on the project at hand, which is raising awareness and providing support and about this issue. So we're happy to raise that flag, and thanks so much to you for your work in this space. You're doing a lot, and just really excited that more and more people are talking about REDS and LEA and this whole issue of fueling.
Yes, amazing. Well, we will put links to your Instagram and your website in the show notes. And thank you both so much for everything that you're doing for female athletes, and really appreciate this conversation too. It's been great.
Likewise.
Thanks, Sarah.
Building muscle can be tough, and gains can be so slow, even for those of us who do a lot of strength training. As an ex-endurance athlete who is now in perimenopause, I know this all too well. It can be frustrating to put in the time in the gym and not see the results I'm looking for. That's why it's super important to take the right supplements at the right time. One of those supplements is essential amino acids, which are needed to trigger muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis happens when you eat high-quality protein, like eggs or whey. And by supplementing with additional essential amino acids, you can make sure you are getting the full benefit of your training sessions. Targeted essential amino acid formulas can be up to 4 times more effective than just eating protein. I've been taking amino acids for almost a year, and in combination with eating quality protein and a couple other supplements, I have managed to turn the tides on age-related muscle loss, which starts at 30 for women, by the way, and I have continued to make strength gains as I head towards 50. AminoCo has been a long-time sponsor of Feisty Media and has supported all of our brands and podcasts over the years. I recommend starting with AminoCo Perform, and you can grab some at aminoco.com/performance. If you enter the code PERFORMANCE, you will save 30% and receive a free gift if it is your first purchase. Give it a try and let me know how it goes. That's aminoco.com/performance and use the code PERFORMANCE to save 30%. As a lifelong runner and triathlete turned CrossFitter, I am stoked to announce that the athletic eyewear brand Tifosi Optics has joined us as a partner here at Feisty Media. Tifosi sports glasses hit all the marks for athletes. They're shatterproof polybicarbonate, so the lenses not only reduce glare, but also offer scratch resistance, which I 100% need. They stay in place when you are moving. The hydrophilic rubber nose pads actually get more grippy the more you sweat, so they are secure and don't slide down your face even when you're running in hot conditions. No matter what sport you do, Tifosi has shades for you. Whether you love tennis, fishing, pickleball, running, cycling, or just hanging out on the beach. They are super reasonably priced, which I love, so I can have multiple pairs that go with any outfit.
And of course, Feisty listeners get a special discount. So head on over to TifosiOptics.com and use the code FM20. FM as in Feisty Media to get 20% off your order. That's FM20 at TifosiOptics.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to make it easy for you.